We sort of affectionately called this the ball sack lecture. But it's what I want to talk about specifically is timing for animation, and kind of the next stage of that, the next step above that, which is pantomime for animation. And let me do these rules real quick. I've got my brains on paper here, and then we'll sort of progress from there. There are 4 basic rules for timing, as they were taught to me by Bruce Johnson. More drawings, slower action. Less drawings, fewer drawings. Faster action. If it's going too slow, take out drawings. If it's going too fast, put in drawings. Theoretically, that should be like really simple. As easy as that idea is, and as easy as the concept is to get your head around it, and especially for those of us who've been working in animation for a while, it's amazing how little attention gets paid to it, to exactly where drawings are placed and how they time out as it pertains to the rhythm of a scene. Go ahead and pull up that first SWIFT. When I was working at Disney, there was always these endless, really serious discussions going on all the time about the bouncing ball test. And anytime someone was having an issue with timing, remember Craig Maris going, "Did you try it with the bouncing ball before you put it in your scene?" Like I remember these long, drawn-out arguments about how things should be placed and how they should play out. The bouncing ball test was just the way everyone sort of experimented with their timing. And this is just like a real basic start. We've got 4 different bouncing balls here, placed in 4 reasonably different timings. The first ball, as you can see, has a contact drawing. When it comes to the bottom, it contacts the ground before it squishes and then pops up. This one is just the opposite. It squishes when it hits the ground, and then the contact drawing comes after. I've seen these long, drawn-out arguments between animators as to what's the correct way. What's the correct way to think about that? I've kind of always felt like it depends on your animation. I can see a use for both of those as depending on what your animation requires. I should say either one of those. And this one here, everything's on 2s except the 2 drawings at the bottom. On this one here, everything's on 1s. So it's the same number of frames, not necessarily the same number of drawings, but with all of them bouncing together, you can see that there's kind of each one has a little bit different feel from each other. And as subtle as that seems, or as insignificant as it seems, it can have a huge effect on your animation depending on how many frames you've been assigned to, what you're trying to do in a certain length of time. So that was just something, it's one of those things that was sort of drilled into my head really early. And I don't see that many people talking about it. When I worked at Universal, people discussed it all the time. When I worked at Citropia, people discussed it all the time. They always talked about the bouncing ball tests. This is just kind of the sort of the beginning. Go to the second one, this is just a super exaggeration of what I just talked about. When you see these things moving, it's not just drawings. You're really feeling what the stuff is made of, what its composition is. So even if like it weren't a ball, if it were an inflatable helicopter and we're bouncing through, you'd still get a feel for what that was. You'd have a feeling for its composition and what it was made of. And timing can have as much of an effect on your animation as your expressions that you put on faces or on characters. In this particular animation example, remember one of the things Bruce talked about was spacing of drawings, how equal spacing of drawings has a tendency to be sort of dull, but you can use it to show strength, power, weight. Whereas your drawings, they're, where you've got variety in the spacing of your work, gives kind of a feeling of springiness or a feeling of composition, of like dancing. And I've added kind of an example here of the concept of dynamics from music. When you're playing music, you can play an instrument where you're hitting every single note with the same impact all the time. Or you can hit some notes strong and some notes soft, and that gives you your dynamics. It's kind of, in real big extremes, these are examples of the concept of differing dynamics in drawing instead of in music. But then I've got some real basic, general things to keep in mind when you're timing a scene. And I don't know if I have a real good example of this. Go to the third Swift, and this sort of touches on it and sort of not. The idea of being, before we even talk about moving things quickly, when you're working on the bouncing ball, the idea is to just kind of have fun with it. If you're experimenting with timing and just trying to get a feel, giving a feel of what something's made of and what it's coming in contact with, just play. I want to talk about moving things very quickly through space. Sometimes you need to move a character faster than ones will allow. If you put a scene on ones and it's still not moving fast enough, it is possible to move something from this side of the screen to this side of the screen with no frames, as long as you anticipate the character and you resolve the character. And what I mean by that is, if the character is going to move this way, he needs to move this way a little bit. Like, you've got to move a little bit this way, and he's there. And now you've got to resolve him. And that means the hair, the clothing, everything. You can move a character from this side of the screen to this side of the screen with no frames, and people will believe it if you're resolving it correctly. And as far as something like, I don't know if I want to, I've kind of written in the notes here, I've talked about smear drawings and multiple drawings. I don't know if we really need to go over that, because I think everyone here knows what we're talking about. When we discuss those things, everyone's looked at those things frame by frame through animation and looked at drawings that have been stretched and smeared. Obviously, I've done it here as an extreme example, so you know what I'm talking about. The ball is just stretched in every single frame. And that's simply for the concept of diagram, but that kind of method can kind of help out on ones. Repetitive drawings can help out on ones. Even action lines can help out if you just put it on a single frame. But you don't have to use any of those things. As long as your anticipation and your resolution is good, you don't have to use those at all. It's kind of up to you and what your animation requires. Think of your timing in your animation as choreography. Think of it like dancing. When I say that, it's more than just moving a character from here to here. It's how do I get the character from here to here and kind of alter the timing a little bit to make it more interesting. Sometimes you're doing a scene where you just need to get the character from here to here in this many frames by 12 o'clock on Friday. It's not really an excuse not to take the time to make it awesome, if you can. And for examples here, let's see. What did I put in here for an example? Okay, I didn't take the time to pull these up because I think everyone's kind of familiar with them. Remember the scene of Cruella de Vil being introduced into 101 Dalmatians? The very first time she walks in, boom, the door goes open. She's boing, 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 boing. It's like rhythm of music. Her coat goes here, she comes over here, she bends over backwards, she talks to male character, male lead, whatever his name is. She makes this little circle, she takes up all the room. As she comes into the room, everything goes out here because she uses the entire space as her introduction space. Very much like dancing. Awesome scene you can look at in Aladdin, where the Sultan has been, I think the Sultan has been told that I can't remember what the situation is. He's coming out to talk to Jasmine for the first time, and she's sitting in the garden, and there's these birds in a cage, and it's all metaphorical, and she's all trapped in a cage. And the Sultan comes down the stairs from the palace, and he goes step, 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 boom, 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 down the stairs. And it's this awesome choreography, rhythm, all in the timing. It's all bouncing ball, too, by the way. Look at the bouncing ball in that scene. It's a little fat Sultan. It's excellent. And it made me think of something I may have skipped. Let me see. Let me back up. This is actually something you guys kind of know, and I don't guess I need to go into this. It's about the fact if you're hovering drawings at the top of your field, you got more drawings at the top of the field and fewer at the bottom, you're going to get this springy, happy feel. If you've got all your drawings at the bottom and fewer drawings at the top, it's going to look heavy, weighty, sad, dejected. We'll look at the flower sack here in just a minute and you'll see what I'm talking about. Let's see if I skipped anything. If you have a lot of action in your scene, a spot of inaction will draw attention. Everything else is moving. If you've got a lot going on, find something you can hold still. Look at every Droopy cartoon that was ever made. Droopy never does anything more than this, except right when something big needs to happen, for the most part. And you never take your eyes off him. All this crap is going on. He's right there. That's one of those examples of taking no action and drawing attention. Awesome timing trick. Let's see, we talked about filming on slows, we talked about the cheats. We use those on ones. Okay, just one, I think this is kind of the last key point I haven't gone over. After you time your stuff out, show it to somebody. We're not necessarily talking about your production work in particular, but as you're working on stuff on your own, maybe it's even your production work, because a lot of times I'll lean over and tell Aaron, look at this, tell me what you think of this, or Rich, or certainly Frank or Doug will come by and we'll discuss that stuff, but I'll always go, what do you think of this? How's this feel? And especially when it comes to things like timing, it's nice to have someone else take a look at it and kind of give you an opinion. They're giving you the feel that you want, kind of the mood that you want. And I don't even know how many great suggestions I get every day. So, just don't be afraid to grab somebody, anybody, that's, walking by and just show them your stuff and ask them what they think. And I talked about that. And I think there's one other bouncing ball. Well, is it number 4? The idea with the bouncing ball is really just to play and have fun, Experiment with timing, experiment with numbers of frames. and try to make it look like it's made out of different materials and different, kind of different stuff. So it's not just, so you're not just doing this all the time. That's really not what it's about. I think when I did my final bouncing ball test at Disney, it sort of did this kind of a thing, and it sprouted wings and flew away. Anything you can think of, just to play. Don't need to take it too seriously. I've got a page here in the notes that kind of shows the bouncing ball applying to some real animation towards the bottom here, this jumping rabbit. I think that was out of Bambi. I'm not really sure. I can't remember. But the bouncing ball applies to all your animation all the time. So the concept of squash, stretch, anticipation, overcoming inertia, and hovering at the top of an arc, just the creation of arcs. And let's see. Let's go to the flower sack. This is something that kind of, I don't think it was ever meant to be an animation thing. I think it was something that derived during Silly Symphonies, if you will watch those old shorts, anytime they were manipulating inanimate objects, they were always putting faces, hands, and feet on them. Think back about, they had a musical instrument thing, and all the saxophones and all the flutes, and everybody had faces, and they all had expressions, and they all had these things that were kind of like putting people in instrument suits. And it was anything that was inanimate, the trees, the flowers, everything seemed to have faces. And it was during I think it was kind of during that period, sort of the end of the period of Ham Lusk and Bill Teitla and those guys, at the beginning of Freddie Moore and Norm Ferguson and those guys, when they started experimenting with pantomiming inanimate objects with no faces on them at all. Kind of at that time, it was right about the time when Mickey started changing and kind of got pupils, and it was right around there. And I think the flower sack, it might have been Ward Kimball, I'm not really sure. Somebody started doing these little drawings of giving expression to an object that had no arms, no legs, and no face. And eventually it got to be kind of an animation thing. When the 3D department started there in Florida, I remember it was all flower sack tests. And they were manipulating a flower sack, doing these real short, moody little expressions showing emotion, without a face, without arms, without legs. Pull up that, is it number 5? So this is the kind of stuff we were sort of doing. Where you got to find a way to move it around, experiment with your squash and stretch. It's like the next step above the bouncing ball. Still kind of the bouncing ball, but I've seen guys do really super complicated things with the flower sack, where they've got them performing magic and pulling stuff out of hats and smiling, no face, but all happy and cool, and you can tell exactly what they're talking about. What I've done here is I just animated 3 examples of 3 just completely different moods. Pull up number 6. That's my evil monkey point. I knocked these out super fast. I could have done so much more with them, but the idea was to show how to put expression into a character that has no features. It's not just a matter of pointing the eyebrows down and giving the mouth a frowny face, or giving the mouth a happy face, or, squinting eyes, or those things can almost just be affectations to animation. So much of your expression can be in the timing and in the body language. Pull up that last one. I highly recommend experimenting with these and just having fun. I think the most famous flour sack character that I can think of just off the top of my head has been the rug from Aladdin, the flying carpet. When I very first saw that, I went, it's the flour sack, And you can get the exact same. Think about the moods of things happening in Beauty and the Beast that don't have faces. That carriage that doesn't have the wheels that walks. It's kind of effects animation, but it's inanimate. It's an inanimate object that's been given a personality and a mood. You see that all over the place. And then I've kind of dropped in I just dropped in a sheet of examples of different animators' flour sack drawings from their tests. Kind of on the last page here. So you can just see examples of what people have done. Like it's not an uncommon thing. It's like people really do it a lot. I think the one on the top right looks like a slice of bread, but it's still the flour sack test all in all. I think down here at the bottom right, it's these little evil characters. These little evil. I love the flour sack in the wheelchair. It looks like Professor X. Awesome stuff. So there's like tons of cool fun that can be had manipulating just these real simple ideas. That's kind of it. Are there any questions about anything that we've talked about? You see anything in the notes that I didn't address that you want to?
I had a quick question. On that splash animation you showed earlier,
yeah.
Do you have like a particular methodology for starting something like that? Like, do you draw the first frame, like the middle frame, the last frame, and start filling in gaps, or like how would you sort of start something like that?
Yes, I mean that's like the most direct way I can be. I draw the most extreme impact part of it first. It's not even at the top of the arc yet necessarily, but it's, I've got this, and you know what? It comes from, honest to God, it comes from watching YouTube. You can go to YouTube and just punch in slow motion water splashes, slow motion milk splashes, slow motion mud splashes, lava. I've gone in there and kind of frame by frame through that stuff and looked at it, and I've always loved effects animation. I always thought it was really cool, and I would have loved to have worked in that department. At the end of Mulan, they loaned me out to effects for 2 weeks. I was in betweening smoke in the burned out village, and I thought it was fun. I just loved the manipulation of the masses, and I think it's really not that different from character animation, but the timing issue is huge in effects animation, and a lot more in-betweens can be, and following all the little tiny stuff, and it's fun to experiment with and play with what you can get away with. A lot of times I don't follow specific individual pieces of stuff. I'll just fill in a mass. I'll make the masses move without being specific. But I will do that. That first drawing is always the big impact, and then kind of a settle and the next impact. Usually water, when something hits water hard, it creates a hole that there's a vacuum taking place, and when the hole fills up again, there's this second reaction, and depending on the material, it can happen 2-3 times, depending on the speed which it's been hit with and what angle it's been hit with. Boy, that's an awesome thing to play with too. How a diagonal hole created in a soft material, creates a cool movement and effects. But you're absolutely right. I kind of picked maybe 3 extremes. And then I go back to the bouncing ball immediately. Okay, here's my top. I'm gonna reach it in this many frames. Now I've got to come off that, and by the time you're getting towards your bottom surface, you're starting to stretch your drawings out, and getting the speed of your effects moving to make contact with the ground or the water or whatever you're coming in contact with. But yeah, I love doing effects.
There's also that Elemental Magic book in the library that's a really good source for effects.
Is that the Joe Gowan book?
Joe Gowan's book. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome stuff, man.
Yeah.
Ronnie,
Yes, sir.
of the 4 bouncing balls you had going,
Yeah.
is there one in particular you think works better than the other ones, and why or why not? Or
Well, now see, there's that argument because I've seen one guy go, you absolutely have to contact the ground before you squash. I think of it in terms of, have you ever seen animation of a guy swinging an axe? And he comes back like this and he swings the axe, but there's never a contact drawing to the tree. There's him coming in, and then there's him on the other side of it and the tree's reaction, but the contact drawing is never made. And in that way, in that thinking, this is the right one, kinda, because it's making its contact, but having to overcome inertia to stretch back up and then come up here. But I've had other guys like Alex Cooperschmidt swears to God, this is the only way to do it, and leave me the hell alone. This is it. Shut up. Just shut up. Shut up. This is it. And he's right about it being, there's a look to it that's springier, it's bouncier.
The second one has a little bit of a jelly feel to it.
It's got a little drag on it,
Yeah.
and it's that overcoming of inertia. My take on it is always, what does your animation call for? What's your character made of? What's the stuff made of that he's hitting? Even if it's just my feet coming in contact with the ground. What's the material made of? That'll have a bearing on which one you kind of pick. And whether you time out your contact drawings on ones or continue to leave them on twos. I don't know, unless you've got a pan going on or something, I don't know why you would use all ones.
Or unless you're Richard Williams.
Or you could be Richard Williams, that's the other thing.
Or Michel Gagne.
There are some people like Eric Goldberg thinks ones is just the most awesome thing in the whole world.
And Michel Gagne used to say something like it's not animation unless it's on one. It's just a pose test.
I often wonder if my acceptance of twos doesn't have anything to do with the fact that I grew up watching the Flintstones.
That's why threes are fine too.
So
sometimes.
my eyes watch those limited animation pieces and are perfectly fine with
As long
them.
as you got a good pose.
And I watch anime and I go, ugh, like putting things on 8s makes me hurt. And but there are people who grew up watching animation on 8s, and it's okay with them. And I can't say a bad thing about Miyazaki. Man, I love that stuff so much that studio does. So I don't know. The answer to your question is every one of them's right, depending on the situation. But I do say this, one of the things I think about all the time when I'm drawing, when I'm animating something, is I always feel the line on the edge of whatever it is I'm drawing. Like if I'm drawing Jasper the Mule, I feel myself tracing the contour of his face, and I'm thinking about what it's made of, thinking about what that tissue is like, and I just animated that scene with him opening his mouth and biting Joe on the butt. That I'm thinking about how that skin stretches and the structure that pulls it, and that's kind of how you choose. how springy do you need that to be, or does it need to be soft and slow, or are you trying to be gentle with it? I should have included the swift of Joe reacting to that, because when he gets bitten, he really does. He's got this spin to him, where he turns around, and he has to overcome inertia on two ends, and it was a kind of a timing trick to feel how fast would you react to something like that. But the scary thing is that they all work. Are there any other questions? Do we all want to go home and eat our macaroni and cheese? Thanks, Ron. Yes, sir. No problem.